I used to think, how can you have a black church and a white church? No, we fall into the same thing. You have a Somalian masjid, you have a Pakistani masjid, you have a Bengali masjid. How did the houses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala become Bengali and Pakistani? Prophet ﷺ called him. And the Prophet ﷺ said this to him. He said, give me a date and I promise you a date in Jannah. And the man refused. Because he was a munafiq. So the Prophet ﷺ said, give me a date and I promise you a date in Jannah. He refused again. So Abu Dahda radiallahu anhu was sitting there. And Abu Dahda radiallahu anhu was a sahabi. It wasn't a very famous sahabi. And Abu Dahda radiallahu anhu said, he said, O Messenger of Allah, if I bring you a date from this man, do you also promise me a date in Jannah? And the Prophet ﷺ said, I promise you a date in Jannah. So Abu Dahda radiallahu anhu went to the munafiq and he said, sell me a date. And the munafiq said, I didn't send the Nabi a date, he didn't want to send you a date. And in some narrations, Abu Dahda had 60 gardens of dates in Medina. In other narrations, 600 gardens of dates. And Abu Dahda radiallahu anhu said, I will give you all my gardens of dates for one date. And the munafiq said, you're having a laugh. He said, no. He said, all my dates for one date. So he gave him all his gardens of dates. And the munafiq gave him one date. And Abu Dahda elated. Why? He's going back to the Messenger of Allah. Because he knows if he goes into Jannah and he gets a date, he's coming back out again. And he comes to the company of the Prophet ﷺ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to the Prophet ﷺ what had happened. And when Abu Dahda came into the gathering, the Prophet ﷺ said, Abu Dahda, when you went away, I promised you one date in Jannah. Now by Allah, I see that your Jannah is full of dates. And then Abu Dahda went home, and he said to his wife, who was in the gardens, he said, get out of the gardens. He says, why? And he told her, and you know what she said? Subhanallah. She said, Rabbi al-Bayt. She said, what a bargain. What a bargain. And the Muhaddithin mentioned that both of them, they lived the rest of their life in relative poverty, but with the guarantee that they were going to get Jannah. Things like racism, the Prophet ﷺ dealt with these issues 1400 years ago. 1400 years ago. And it's so deeply entrenched within us. When Abu Dharr, he said to Bilal, he said, Ya Ibn Sawda, you son of a black woman. And the Prophet ﷺ heard about this. The Prophet ﷺ called Abu Dharr. And he said, Ya Abu Dharr, innaka imra'un fika al-jahiliyyah. He said, oh Abu Dharr, you are a man who still has the traits of ignorance in you. Meaning the pre-Islamic traits. Now I ask you, how many of us still have the pre-Islamic traits within us? How many of us have the pre-Islamic traits within us? You know, how when we speak about some other race, you know, with a blanket statement, yeah, they're all like this. And they're all like that. You have people saying, yeah, Bilal, oh, subhanallah, beautiful sahabi, Bilal. But you look down on black people. If Bilal had a huge masjid of Bilal, and if Bilal radiallahu came to the masjid today, he couldn't become a committee member because he doesn't belong to the right race. You know, these are things what they call 1400 years ago. You know, he destroyed the thing. You see the basic things. You know, Pakistani and a Bengali be arguing, and they're arguing, and the Pakistani is defending everything about Pakistan, and the Bengali is defending everything about Bangladesh. And then when the Pakistani goes home, yeah, so he comes from maybe Kashmir, okay? So he's from Kashmir. Then he's at home, Now he's speaking about Pakistanis. So he said, yeah, you know all those Punjabis, they're all like this. They're all like this. And the Punjabi said, you know all these Mirpuris, they're all like this. You know, all generalizations. All generalizations. You look at state of Pakistan. Karachi wants to break away, Balochistan wants to break away, Azad Kashmir wants to break away, and parts of Sarhad are going to break away. So what are you going to have? I'll tell you what you're going to have. You're going to have little fiefdoms like Bahrain, Qatar, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Sharjah, Ras Al Khaimah. You pick from one end and you reach the other end. But you have your kursi. It makes you feel good. And there's so many people, even practicing people, who speak about these kind of things without really understanding the implications of their words. The implication of their words. The vast majority of the Sahaba could not read or write. But can any Imam Razi say that he understood the Quran better than the Sahaba? Can any Imam Bukhari say that he understood the Hadith better than the Sahaba? No, because they lived the Quran. They lived the Hadith. They lived the Sunnah. And you look today, subhanAllah, Muslims have become slaves to skin. Many of the youngsters, many of the elders, many of them, they're slaves to a light skin color. Many of the youngsters who are slaves to, a dark skin color. The way they speak, no salam alaikum. Go on, bro. You know what? What's happening? Talking. SubhanAllah. Halfway down your backside. Sunnah is that they be above your ankles. This guy's got them halfway down his backside. It's a reality. How did you become slaves to that? I'll tell you how you became slaves, because you had no great focus in life. If you had a focus in life, the Prophet ﷺ would have been your own. If you had a focus in life, if you knew, then you would have said the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, you would have said Rabi al-Bayt. Abu Bakr would have been your role model. Umar ibn Khattab would have been your role model. Khadija would have been your role model. They would have been your role models. But if you have no great thing, if you have no great Islamic goal, I'll tell you, even the practicing brothers, I'll tell you what you'll be discussing. You'll start practicing, you'll think you're pious. The only thing you'll be discussing is how to pray salah. Where shall we put the hands? Where shall we not put the hand? Should we say Ameen loudly? Should we say Ameen softly? And how often you see youngsters spending hours and hours just discussing these things? 1400 years and you haven't sorted out your salah? You for real? No, seriously. 1400 years have elapsed and you guys still haven't understood your salah yet. Today the Muslims don't have any standards. Today the Muslims don't have a vision. To us what is deen? To us deen is, grow a beard. You grow a beard. Nowadays they say, bro was practicing. What makes you practice? He's got a beard. That's it. SubhanAllah, what's your threshold? Your threshold's down here. Sister's practicing, what does it mean? She wears a hijab. Don't matter she don't. She got hijab upstairs. She might look, the rest of her clothing might be Hollywood or Bollywood. She may pray, she may not pray. That doesn't matter. But that's the threshold now of practicing. When that is your threshold, then on the day of judgment, me and you are going to be standing on one side, and the likes of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum are going to be standing on the other side. People who really aspire to do something concrete for the community. And unfortunately, the state of the Muslims today is that, our vision, we don't have a vision. And the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they were a group of people who had a vision. Umar, in a period of 10.5 years, he made sure that everybody in the Muslim world who could not work, subhanAllah, who could not work, that they were financed, they got an allowance. Umar said 4 days before he passed away, he said, if Allah gives me life, until next year, I will make sure that everybody, that no other women, 4 days before he passed away, he said, that no woman in the Muslim world will need any other man besides Umar ibn Khattab. He said, I will ensure that the Bedouins in Sana, in the mountains of Sana, will get their allowance. In the 10.5 years, Umar's Islam spread from here all the way to Pakistan. Umar started child benefit. He started child benefit. The narration mentioned that a group of people came into Medina, and this group of people, they were travelers. So what Umar said to Abdurrahman ibn Auf, he said, let's go and serve these people. Who was Abdurrahman ibn Auf? The reason I'm telling you all this, who was Abdurrahman ibn Auf? Abdurrahman ibn Auf was one of the 10 who was guaranteed Jannah. He was one of the 10 who was guaranteed Jannah. He was a multi-millionaire. And he said to Abdurrahman ibn Auf, the most powerful man on the face of this earth is telling a multi-millionaire, let's go and serve these people. All night they looked after him. And in the night, there was this lady, she had a small child, and the baby kept on crying, and no one told her, look after your child. Later on, the baby stopped crying. So Umar went up to her and he said, what an evil mother you are. All night your child has been crying. Why didn't you look after him? And she said, oh, Amirul Mu'mineen. No, sorry, she didn't know this was Umar ibn Khattab. She said, you know, Amirul Mu'mineen, Umar ibn Khattab has stipulated an allowance for that child who has been weaned off. So I'm trying to wean the child off, but I need that allowance. So Umar asked the age, and he said, don't hurry, don't hasten. And then the most powerful man from doing khidmah of other people. Why did he do khidmah? Why did he do khidmah of other people? Because the Prophet ﷺ said, the only reward which is greater than serving other people is martyrdom in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we never regard it as a part. We never regard it as a part of deen. No, it's never ever mentioned. Racism is never mentioned from the pulpit. Khidmah is never mentioned from the pulpits. And if we have people who are ready to do khidmah, I'm telling you, it's a great element of tarbiyah in it. I tell the youngsters, I said, look, go and feed the homeless. Go and give them dawah. It's your islah in it. It brings humility in a person. Umar was a humble person. And Abdurrahman ibn Auf says that when Umar led the Fajr Salah that day, he goes, I swear by Allah, we couldn't understand what he was reciting because he cried so much. And then Umar turned around after Salah and he said, woe unto you, O Umar, how many children have you killed because of your rule? And then he made it. He stipulated that the allowance should start from the time that the child is born. From the time that the child is born. Umar started child benefit. Now, this was the vision that the Muslims had. I was reading that Umar, look at this, Umar radiallahu anhu, that if anybody came for Jummah Salah who could not understand Arabic, Umar would have that Jummah khutbah translated. 1400 years ago, Umar radiallahu anhu had this. 1400 years ago. And 1400 years later in the West, we have new Muslims coming to our masjid and the Jummah khutbahs are still in Urdu and no translation. No translation. surprised. They say Sheffield is what? The capital of what? Converts, is it? I've heard that many years ago. Maybe that Jafar Yassin was here. But they say statistics show in America that approximately 60 to 70% of people who embrace Islam turn away from Islam. Right, but the Muslim community has done nothing. You've done nothing. Then you understand. You know, in Birmingham, really, I realize this because I have a huge family. We have 9 brothers and sisters. My wife had 9 brothers and sisters. And I'm by myself in Birmingham, my wife by herself in Birmingham. And we realize, although alhamdulillah, I have a huge support for my students. But you realize the missing family. What about a person who converts and he leaves everything? Where's the support? The support is this year first couple of days from Akhi. MashaAllah, barakallah, Abdul Brother. Come, we'll give you a kebab. Then you're there. You need to go back to the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. Imam Tirmidhi relates in the Shama'il that the Prophet ﷺ's nature was this, that a slave girl, the lowest were the slaves, and out of the slaves, the lowest were the girls, could hold the hand of the Prophet ﷺ and take him to any street in Medina and ask him for assistance. The Prophet ﷺ was ready to assist. Ready to assist. This was the character of the Prophet ﷺ. And it starts, and the character is something which needs time to be developed upon. You know, people who have anger, you get angry, then you read the seerah, and you sit with the ulama. It's often easier, you know, to be abrupt to people. You know, to be nice to people, to speak to people, to do things for other people, to open the door for other people. Yeah? Be kind, treat the sisters at university like you would like your own sisters to be treated. There are two extremes here when it comes to sisters. There's the one, you know, if somebody messed with his sister, my sister, but then you go and flirt around with other people's sisters. You go and mess around with other people's sisters. You wouldn't like it to your own sister. When the young man came to the Prophet ﷺ, look at that, beautiful. Look at the Prophet ﷺ. When the young man came to the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, "Oh, Messenger of Allah, give me permission to fall at you." And the Prophet ﷺ didn't rebuke him. He didn't say, "How dare you?" Can you imagine today? Some young guy comes to the local sheikh and he says, "Yeah, you know, give me a bit of leeway, you know what I mean? You're not married yet." Sheikh's boy say, "What? How dare you that?" What did the Prophet ﷺ say? Look at the word, subhanallah. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Udnu minni." Allahu Akbar. He said, "Udnu minni." This man wants to commit one of the most vile acts there is. And the Prophet ﷺ is the most purest of beings. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Come closer to me. Come closer to me." They came closer to him. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Would you like anybody to fornicate with your wife?" He said, "Sister." Then he said, "Except." He said, "No." And then the Prophet ﷺ placed his hand upon his chest and he made dua for him. And the young man said, "By the time I left the gathering, the most vile thing in my eyes was fornication." But you see the dawah of the Prophet ﷺ, you have that extreme. So we'll mess around with other people. So treat the sisters like your own sister. And how you like your sister to be treated by other people. And then you have the other ones who are the practicing brothers. They're supermen when they come to sisters. Oh, they shouldn't be here. You know, I know you're frustrated. Take your frustration out somewhere else. It's true. And listen, I've been on the dawah field for a very long time. I've seen this. Alhamdulillah, I have many students who run Islamic societies. You know, I see this all the time. Youngsters, you know, they're heavy with the sisters. They're heavy with the sisters. They're rude with the sisters. And that's wrong. You should be polite. You should be caring for your sisters like you care for your own sister. Like you wouldn't want other people to look after your own sister. That's how you should be. And all this, will bring the ummah closer together. How you perceive each other. When somebody walks through that door, what do you think? What's the first thing that comes to your mind? Is it he's a Bengali? Or he's a Pakistani? Or he's Somalian? Is that what they think? No, that's my brother. That's my brother indeed. And the Prophet ﷺ, indeed the brothers are, indeed the believers are brothers. Al-mu'minun al-jasadin wahid. Indeed the believers are like one. And I say to this, if you can't have a brotherhood feeling here, amongst 200 people, you can dream on about our big aspirations. It doesn't happen that way. And brotherhood, sometimes you have to overlook other people's shortcomings. Everybody has shortcomings. And smile. And Muslims don't often smile enough. For one reason or the other, some people don't think it's piety. The Prophet ﷺ, sometimes it loses your rep. For one reason or the other, you must just smile, listen, and view the characteristic of doing khidmah, serving other people, serving your community. That is something which is fundamental, but missing within the Muslim community. If we had people who are in the masajid, who are going outside the masjid and bringing the youngsters into the masjid, that would be amazing. I tell you, there was not one Sahaba who was made only for the masjid. The masjid made him, but he wasn't made for the masjid. The salah, the company of the Prophet ﷺ, the knowledge that made him, but he wasn't made for the masjid. Every single Sahabi knew the virtue of dying in Medina. Every single Sahabi knew the virtue of Salah in the Haram. But how many of them actually died in Mecca or Medina? Only a handful. Why? Because they were kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas. They were the best of people taken out for the benefit of humanity. And everybody here, I tell you, I've said this many times, everybody here has abilities. Everybody here has abilities. And a Muslim should utilize those abilities, but they are never from other. May it be brother or may it be sister. You have abilities, utilize them for your community. First, learn a bit about your deen, the fundamentals of your deen. But utilize your abilities. This was the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. He utilized the ability of everybody within the community. I'll tell you an example of two people who had totally different, varying abilities. But the Prophet ﷺ utilized them. One was Khalid bin Walid. Who was Khalid? Khalid was the man on the battle of Uhud. He tried to kill the Prophet ﷺ. On Khaybar he did. On Sulh Hudaybiyah he did. On Hudaybiyah and on Khandaq. On all these occasions, it was his duty to reach the Prophet ﷺ and kill him. And when the Prophet ﷺ came to Makkah to do the Umrah, when they had a treaty with the Mushrikeen of Makkah, Khalid left Makkah saying that if Muhammad is in Makkah, I can't pay to stay in Makkah. So when the Prophet ﷺ came into Makkah, one of the first people he asked for was who? Khalid bin Walid. He said, where's Khalid? He asked his brother Walid ibn Walid, who was a Muslim. He said, where's your brother Khalid? And he said, oh, Messenger of Allah, he's left, saying that if Muhammad is in Makkah and I'm in Makkah, I can't bear it. He won't return alive. So the Prophet ﷺ said, Lillahi durru aqli Khalid. He said, an intelligent man like Khalid, has he not understood that there is no one but Allah and I am the messenger of Allah? I am the messenger of Allah. And then the Prophet ﷺ, and then he said, if Khalid came to us, we would utilize his abilities. Then the Prophet ﷺ went back. Walid ibn Walid, when he reached Medina, he wrote a letter to Khalid ibn Walid. He said, when the Messenger of Allah came into Makkah, one of the said, intelligent man like Khalid, has he still not understood that there is no God but Allah, and I am the messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And if he came to us, we will utilize him. And the words of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam permeated the heart of Khalid. And the narrations mentioned that Khalid jumped upon his horse. He went and he took his sword and he went to Medina. And when the Prophet ﷺ saw him, he smiled. And Khalid says he did not stop smiling until I placed my hand in the hand of the Prophet ﷺ. He did not stop smiling until I placed my hands in the hand of the Prophet ﷺ. And then what did the Prophet ﷺ do with Khalid? And the Prophet ﷺ said, Today, Makkah has thrown away its liver. Today, Makkah has thrown away its liver. And then 6 months after this, came the battle of Mota. 6 months after this. And in a period of 6 months, Khalid radiallahu from Aduwullah became Sayfullah. From the enemy of Allah became the sword of Allah. And history records only 2 major generals never lost a battle. Never lost a battle. One was Genghis Khan and the other one was Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu. He changed the landscape of history. Warrior. And the Prophet ﷺ utilized his abilities. So everybody here has ability. And that needs to be challenged, channeled for the sake of Allah. Because by Allah, you don't know what tomorrow holds for you. None of us know if we are going to be here. And we need to utilize our time and our effort and our wealth for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the other man was who? The other man was Hassan ibn Thabit radiallahu anhu. This was a man who was a poet. He was known as the poet of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When the people of Medina began to write poetry against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Hassan ibn Thabit and 2 other Sahaba came to his defense reciting poetry. And the Prophet ﷺ would place a kursi in his masjid and Hassan would sit on that chair and he would recite poetry. For no other Sahabi do I know that the Prophet ﷺ placed a chair in the masjid. And the Prophet ﷺ said for him, he said, oh Allah, help him bi Ruh al-Qudus. Assist him bi Ruh al-Qudus. Jibreel alayhi salatu salam. This was a man who had never carried a sword in his life. He had never carried a sword in his life. The narration mentioned that one day the Prophet ﷺ made him look after the wives and the family of the Prophet ﷺ. One of the auntie of the Prophet ﷺ saw a man from the distance. She said to Hassan, she said, you know that guy, he's got sinister agenda. Deal with him. Hassan said, if I was such a warrior, I wouldn't be looking after the women. You deal with it. But the Prophet ﷺ utilized his abilities. He would send him on expeditions. And the narration mentioned that once the Muslims got ambushed. And the Muslims ran in different directions. And Hassan stood there. A man who couldn't fight. But he recited poetry. He recited poetry in the remembrance of Allah. In the remembrance of the Prophet ﷺ. In the virtues of martyrdom, in the virtues of Jannah. And the narration mentioned that he inspired the Muslims so much that they regrouped. And when they regrouped, they attacked and they defeated the enemy. When they came back to Medina, they told the Prophet ﷺ what had happened. And the Prophet ﷺ told Hassan, he said, oh Hassan, ascend my pulpit and recite for me the same poetry that you recited in the battlefield. Hassan began to shake. He said, the Messenger of Allah, me? On your pulpit? And the Prophet ﷺ said, Hassan, ascend the pulpit and shibbi and shadakallah. He said, recite for me, O Hassan, because Allah wants to hear your recitation. Because Allah wants to hear your recitation. And Hassan radiallahu anhu ascended the pulpit and he recited the poetry. And the Prophet ﷺ took off his blessed cloak and he gave it to Hassan. Hassan was elated. He went home and he gave it to his wife. He said, if I die before you, make sure that I am buried in this. see, these are two men of different abilities, but they were utilized for the deen. Everybody here has that ability. Everybody needs to be channeled for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nobody, because Muslims are people who have high aspirations. Muslims are not pessimistic. Why? Because we trust in Allah. We trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, Muslims need to be people who have aspirations. People that when we leave this dunya, that people make dua for us. Now I ask you, and I'll finish here. When you leave this dunya, and it's not, that, how do you want to be remembered? And it's not, I'm saying when they've got a lot of people praise you big time, no. How do you want to be remembered? In the sense that when you leave this dunya, do you want people to make dua for you? You do something in this dunya which is sadaqah jariyah, or you want to pass away in your books and go, finish 6 foot under nothing. But you want to be in your grave, make people make dua. You've done something in this dunya, that people will remember. That from the depths of your grave that you have an impact. You've left a legacy behind you. And you pass away, but for many, many years after you've left sadaqah jariyah, which is still benefiting while you are in your grave. You've taught somebody. You've done good to somebody. That when they remember you, when they pray their salah, they make dua for you. You've built a masjid. You've helped an orphan. But that's what Muslims should be like. That when you're in your grave, from the depths of your grave, you leave a legacy. In the time of Salahuddin, rahimahullah, Salahuddin's teacher was a man called Nuruddin Zingi. He was the king of Syria, and Salahuddin he said, I learned justice from Nuruddin. Nuruddin was an immensely pious person. Ibn Athir rahimahullah says that I've studied the life of all the khulafa and all the kings. And since Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, the Muslims never had a leader like Nuruddin. As over 450 years later, for 450 years the Muslims never had a leader like Nuruddin. And Salahuddin, he was a scholar. He was a hafiz. He knew entire Shafi text off by heart. And he was a judge. And one day somebody brought their case to him, and he assessed their case and he passed judgment against them. And this man went to the grave of Nuruddin. Nuruddin was known for his justice. And Nuruddin, and he stood by the grave of Nuruddin, and he said, oh Nuruddin, if you were alive today, by Allah, I would have attained justice. Only if you were alive. And Salahuddin heard about this. And Salahuddin called him back, and he reassessed this case, and he passed judgment in his favor, and the man began to cry again. And Salahuddin said, what are you crying for now? I'll pass judgment in your favor. I'll pass judgment in your favor. What are you crying for now? He said, I'm not crying because you passed judgment in my favor. I'm crying in the remembrance of a man that his justice was such that even from the depths of his grave it has an impact. Even from the depths of his grave it has an impact. And this is, my dear respected brothers and sisters, as believers, we are humanity should see our khair. We must impact people. We must impact the community around us. But then we have to be transitive in our dawah. People must see something within us and smile. Therefore, this all takes an effort. Your salah, masjid, learn about your deen.